Blessings and welcome back, everyone, to the 15th episode of 36 in our Decanic journey and the third Decan of Leo. The dates for this are August 12th or 13th, the 22nd or 23rd, depending on where you are. And I am Elsa. I'm joined here today again by KD Dayton and David Fisher. Hello, and David Fisher, you are at in the first place Astrology, and KD Dayton, you're at kddayton.com. And today's an exciting Decan, so I'm just going to dive right in with a few little openers. So T-Season Chang, from her book 36 Secrets, calls this Decan "No Guts, No Glory," and Austin Coppock calls it the banner. The tarot card associated, the minor tarot card, is the Seven of Wands, also called the Lord of Valor. And what we're already seeing in these names are the fact that we have this sun-ruled sign, Leo, and we have the second Lord of this Decan, which is Mars. So again, we have the Mars card, which is the Blasted Tower, and the Leo card, which is Fortitude, and we've talked about it quite a lot. But what I wanted to bring up with the Fortitude card this time is that in the Hermetic deck, it's called the Daughter of the Flaming Sword. And I thought this image in particular was striking when it has to do with the Martian quality. So you definitely have this solar figure, but here, instead of having, you know, the woman who, sort of chaste woman, shall we say, something like this, conquering the lion with like beauty and grace or something. Here we have this armored lady with her hand up, like almost in a more battle-oriented depiction, with the leonine shield and the fire blazing from the top of the card. So I thought that this was a real kind of like martial sun depiction, and I wanted to share that, the Daughter of the Flaming Sword. And themes of this Decan would be like a rallying cry or courage or this iron heart. Here we have the sun as being seen, but being seen potentially by your enemies or adversaries, or being seen in the light of a martial quality. So I'm going to move on to read from Austin Coppock's 36 Faces, where we will dive into that theme quite deeply. And here again and again that this face talks about not only enemies from the outside, but enemies from within, like inner battles and or inner courage and or inner rebellion. So I'm going to go ahead with what he says here. He said the moment of glory, which graces the second face, gives way in the third to a spirited struggle. It's not enough to have gained one's rightful place. It must be defended against hostile forces, both within and without. Tenacity and courage are required to fulfill one's role under such trying conditions. Fear afflicts the heart, and enemies close in to take the throne. So when we're thinking about courage, and I think Austin will move on to say this in a poetic way, but I taught this as well for those of you like in another life, like I'm a yoga instructor, and when we would do yoga or like the warrior pose or something like this, you probably have heard other teachers reference this, but courage doesn't take place in the absence of fear. Courage takes place when we are the most afraid or have something worthy to protect. So when we're afraid is when we must, muster courage. It's not in another time, essentially. So courage is a strong relationship to fear, and we see like Mars and Saturn, but Mars as fear in this case. So it's like bringing up that fire when we encounter fear, that I think that martial quality with the sun really exemplifies. Austin goes on to say, the power of the utterly steadfast heart, which never fails to rise to the challenges that are presented. This quality of spirit, the invincible heart, is not dependent on bodily fortitude or an advantageous position. It's accessible only when strengths are unavailable. When allies have fled and the enemy looms and the body betrays you, there you will find your unconquerable heart. It is the solar martial fire that moves broken limbs. The body can be broken, but what resides in the heart is untouchable. It's invincible. It's the hero's heart. In the Yavana Jataka, we have a depiction of a woman seated on an ivory throne and contemplating the murder of her enemies. This Decan grants the power to hold body and spirit together under extreme duress. And then in the fragmentary Hellenistic text, the 36 heirs of the zodiac, it attributes this Decan to the god Serapis. And what's interesting about that, Austin will go on to tell the story of Serapis, and you guys can kind of dig into that. It's kind of this complex solar and underworld figure. But the king of Egypt at the time, who intended this Serapis figure to become more visible, himself was the work of a king striving to consolidate his rule over a hostile culture. So we see that being played out in real time with that story of Serapis. But yeah, just that idea of the banner, right? Bearing the name of truth and justice and beauty. It just demands this sort of almost spiritualization of the solar fire that almost begs, like it's not like an intellectual thing when warriors are, out on the battlefield, potentially losing to their enemy. You are rallying the cry, you're rallying around the flag or whatever. It's in times where it needs to inspire this sort of like raw martial courage. And that's what I'm really, that's the big takeaway for me with this Decan.
Well, they defend the interests of the king. Mars is the warrior or the general that defends the king's land, the king's interests, faith and whatever. So here is almost like we have this righteous warrior that knows in their heart that it doesn't matter how the plan fails, the purpose of their actions is one, and is to serve, and it is to serve that inner fire that inspires them, which is the kingly office, the king's orders, because they're trying to be whatever they need.
I love that, because if we think of the sun as the king, right, which we have been, then you have that right-hand man of the king that is always brave and always courageous and there to uphold or protect or honor the king in their valor. So yeah, that's a perfect example, David.
And looking at, sorry, Katie, go on.
Oh, I was just going to say, and it's also, I think, illustrative to look at who the enemies of the king are. Because we have, enemies from outside, right? Clearly, in a traditional political sense, maybe, foreign powers competing for control of land or something. But there's also an element of enemies coming from within, and the idea of rebellion and revolution and kind of being taken down from within. That is really interesting to think about in this card, especially when we get to, in this Decan, when we get to the tower, for instance. So.
Yes, I love that, because Mars is also betrayal. So it's almost like being betrayed by your right-hand man. And who can betray you the best? Your right-hand man.
Yep.
Yeah, we were talking about that yesterday, actually, on a study group that Elsa and I were participating in. And I want to say more about Mars and some other things when we get to the cards, but because they depict it. But comparing these two Decans, the first Decan of Leo and the last Decan of Leo, which are ruled by the malefics within the solar framework, right? Because the sun rules Leo. You see how you have to defend your own idea of self. And there is one decan that's Jupiter, that is one that validates your idea of self, and it's the middle one. But these two ones, they more challenge it than not. And so you can understand, therefore, that in this world of multiplicity, you will always have to be more defending yourself and your idea of self, and trying to embody it through circumstance, sometimes to no success. And that's what the first decan comes to teach us, that sometimes, you know, things will not go as planned, that you will have to still grasp, you'll still have to create a sense of self with things that go wrong and be sturdy in that. This decan is not about that anymore, even though it's also a malefic and it challenges your idea of self. You already know, it's when you realize that you can overcome it through courage. It's not still trying to define who you are, rather it's really, as you are saying, Elsa, trying to defend it from the enemies outside and within. But we'll get more into that.
Yeah, I think yes, for sure, as a defense, but also like as a wild, like bloody defense, because of the fact that we have the first malefic, like David mentioned, being Saturn, and then we've got Jupiter. Those are both day planets, so they work with the sun. Even though the sun and Saturn are like the tension of these polar opposites, they're still in the day team. They're still trying to construct an ideal or something like this, where Mars is on the night team. So it's a little bit more malefic here. It's going to try to tear down what has been constructed, for better or worse.
And, you know, I again, we're getting a little bit ahead, because I could mention this later on with the tarot cards, but I think it's better to mention it now, that Chang does talk about these 5s and 7s and contrasts what 5s and 7s mean in tarot. Even though they both are off balance, they're both striving towards the 6. They're both working towards that equilibrium of the 6, what you talk about, David, you know, the realization of the self, the victory of the self.
Yeah, that's really interesting.
Yeah, and so if you remember, Saturn's card is the world. And in that card, in the first Decan video, we mentioned specifically how the ovum that's often in the world is kind of like the ring of an arena. So it's that fun competitive battle. Maybe you're striving to be victorious. With this Decan, with Mars, it's more catastrophic. It's a little bit more aggressive. Like the outcome of a Mars battle versus a Saturn battle, like the 5 battle versus the 7 battle, is a lot more, the stakes are higher, I should say.
Like it's like a more bloody battle, essentially. It's a battle for maybe not to the death like how Saturn is, but you're going to draw blood. It's going to be a wild ride. It's going to be a destructive.
We've been through one of the 7s with the 7 of Pentacles, and we talked about how the 6 pentacles that were in that bush in the Rider-Waite depiction that the guy's looking at, they are something that didn't come out as planned, even though they were promised as stable. And that guy had to conform to the 1 pentacle. And here with the wands, we see kind of the same thing. There's one guy holding 1 wand, and there are other 6 that are pointed at him. And so many times is, well, you had this one idea that you were trying to implement, and that has to do with who you are. And with the 5, you have this difficulty, this crisis point where you understand that needs to be a resilience. There needs to be more of who you are integrated into your practice in order to make it truly real. But here, it's like circumstances telling you, I'm glad that you learned that lesson. Now you're going to learn that it doesn't matter too. Because, you know, I can pull around from under you, and does your sense of self stand if I do that? And so it is kind of that situation where you are asked as a soldier to make the ultimate sacrifice, to put your life on the line, to go full kamikaze, you know, because courage. You embody who you are and your ideal, which is a solar principle, again, no matter the cost. And here we see Leo ruling this part of the deck and being the base for this. And it's a Martian face. So it's like, I adopt this stance against the things in the world that defy my ego to the last consequences. I don't care what happens. Saturn is more like, well, I need to preserve my sense of self. And for that, I have to have very good limitations of what it is. Mars is just like, okay, I will fight for the right to defend my own sense of self. I don't care what it takes, you know?
Break all the rules.
Yeah, and break it down. And like, if you think about it, this conversation had me thinking about like planets in exaltation, because one of our teachers, our mutual teachers, Achyuta Bhavadasa, which I'm sure you all are familiar with over at Nightlight Astrology, when he was talking to us about planets in exaltation, he was kind of saying like what's exalted might or must or whatever fall. So you have that exaltation and fall dynamic, or a lot of times exalted planets will have this sort of like gain and loss potential in them, or like those types of extremes. And when we think of the last decan, the Jupiter decan, the middle decan of Leo, we think of like that king for a day, or coming back with the riches and the spoils and lobbying and being like this kingly upheld figure. But people love to exalt something and tear it down.
Yeah.
They, you know, like our human nature loves to like exalt something and then think it's like tragic and it must be like, you know, pulled down from its throne eventually. So that's kind of what I think about with this Martian like tower like experience, that as much as we love to exalt the king, we also love to like tear down the celebrity or tear the king from his throne through like internal, external, you know, forces.
Remember Madonna?
Madonna is a nativity. Her son is during this, occurs during this decan. But I hate to bring this up because I really don't usually use modern astrological correlations with tarot at all. But sometimes people refer to the tower as being ruled by the planet Uranus, the modern outer planet Uranus, which it's an interesting myth actually in relation to the taking down of the king, the overthrow of the old order. I encourage anyone who's not familiar to look up the myth of Uranus, because I'm not going to do it justice right now, but it is an interesting aspect of this card to think about, of the Tower card, in relation to Leo and kingliness and leadership.
Yeah, like a sudden change that overthrows the, like basically everything that was built essentially. And you know, we have to have all three of those fire-like qualities within us to be like balanced. We have to like know that the solar contains the dark, and there's this like night and day polarity that we see in Leo 1. We have to know that like our images of exaltation can exist, and we can like strive for like high form, high ideal. And then how easily or how necessary it is to break down those structures, or look at them fiercely, if nothing else, you know, have the bravery to look at everything we've built and edit, which Mars can be like, edit. It's like, nope, not this, not this, not this. That part sucks. That part is corruption. And that's, I guess, like a higher form of what Mars would be here. But we can also see just like rebellion and sex and just being out for blood or something like this, you know?
And examples are revolutions, and plain and simple. When you look at history, you have these revolutions being supported by the people who are informed, you know, by the layers that are making the revolution, because, you know, general people don't normally have weapons, and they don't normally know about the dealings of the higher echelons of society, because it's meant to be that way, so they don't revolt. But then, you know, some people who are wanting to ascend but are impeded, the Seven of Wands, by the higher echelons, because they need things to change in order to ascend. They go up and make that revolution happen. They dismantle the power that was already established in order to establish a new power. And we all know that in the aftermath of revolutions, you never have a centralized mode of governing. You never have a cohesive form of government. It takes decades for that to be achieved. And we haven't yet, actually, if you ask me, achieved a stable enough form of government after all that.
And maybe that's kind of the point, that I'm not sure if we can or whatever. It does have a chaos quality to it, you know?
And that's the tower that we're talking about, yeah?
Yes, that's the tower that we're talking about. That's like the chaos quality of this Saturn Leo and this Sun Leo, like building, it's day, right? It's daytime planets. It's like build a structure, find out who I am, uphold who I am, do all these things. But in that, we have to be willing to deconstruct who we are, deconstruct the ego. And there has to be a certain amount of chaos. And I'm not sure like what those ratios are, like what the concoction is for like the perfect, you know, alchemical balance. But here we don't necessarily see that. We just see the chaos of destruction and the tearing down of the king, perhaps.
And I want to go more into that chaos once we get to the cards, because there's more about the multiplicity there that I want to dive deep into.
Let's do it. KD, are you ready?
Yeah, for sure. So I know we've seen now 3 different times the strength card, but if we consider it in this Decan, it really does add a lot of heft in the combination of the Tower and the 7 of Wands. So the strength card is the overall card of Leo. So we've seen it for Leo 1, Leo 2. But I think what this brings is not a total counterbalance, but a slightly more positive spin or some spin of potential nobility and valor. That's why this Decan is called the Lord of Valor. Strength's purpose here, or its real, I think, force here, is that infinity symbol over the head of these 3 cards on the left, because in T. Susan Chang's book, she talks a little bit more about the tree of life, and she talks about the Sephira that's associated with the 7s, and that sometimes that's translated as victory. But it also refers to a type of victory that I might consider a little bit imperialist, which is the desire by man to be remembered for all of time, to be monumentalized in some way. And that's why we have all these old dudes who put their names on bridges and roads and stone monuments and buildings because they want to be remembered. So to me, that signifies more than victory, endurance. And Chang provides an alternate translation of the Sephira associated with the 7s to mean endurance or eternity. So I think that's what's present here in the strength card, that idea of wanting to make a lasting impression. And you can also see, even in the cards that don't have the infinity symbol above their head, on the far right here, we have a traditional card. Look at the expression on that woman's face. She's not the complacent, peaceful woman fighting the lion that we see in the other cards. That to me is the fury and fortitude of a woman who wants her name to live on in history. She's expecting, after she defeats this lion, to be carved into the mountainside, a likeness of her, so people of all time can remember how ferocious she was.
Yeah, like a little bit like on the Hermetic deck, she's like a little bit more of a warrior. And we see in, what was it, the Yavana Jataka, the woman who plots on her enemies or something like this. I think where we're getting some of that spiritual or some of that infinity is really that archetype of the sun. Like it wants to be infinite. It wants to be remembered. It's a very solar, like a daytime quality that lives at the heart of the matter.
It's a selection principle, which means it will define something for what it is, and it has to be purely that. And if it's purely that, it will be for all time. And the sun is what we have that most approaches the idea of God. It's the pure that gives everlasting, it's ever giving of life and energy to everything else around it. It's the center of gravity of their systems, right? The stars, such as our sun. And I believe that, yes, the strength card, it just pushes us to go further than our limitations, because it doesn't want to perceive the multiplicity. It doesn't want to perceive everything. It wants to actualize the selection principle within it oneself. Like, I am this and I will prove it.
You know, and when we see we'll talk about this, I'm sure, next, but in the Blasted Tower, or the Tower card in the Hermetic deck, called Lord of the Hosts of the Mighty, which again, sun, lion, mighty, like, you know, you got that idea. but you see like it could be like a planetary beam, but what looks to be a sun shooting out its lightning bolt onto the tower. So it's almost like the lightning or the chaos here is like an aspect of like a martial sun, where it's almost like, you know, at night it could look like almost these like solar, you know, fire coming through the sky of the night with the lightning, you know. So I just wanted to mention that we kind of see those solar qualities embodied also with the martial destruction.
Totally. And yeah, I want to move on to the tower in just a second. But before I do, I want to mention again, I think we talked about this a little bit in the first Decan, but Aleister Crowley sometimes describes this card instead of strength as lust. And so T. Susan Chang kind of elucidates this in 36 Secrets by saying he meant not just physical passion, but the rapture of vigor, or the strength exercised. And lust and the tower, rather, they look like the climax of release.
Yeah,
which
absolutely.
I think is a beautiful like way to think about these two together.
Absolutely. And as an astrologer, I would definitely always put the heading of lust. I mean, sometimes in Venus, but mostly that lusty quality as a martial quality. And you put that with the sun and you do get a vigor for power. You do get that like, let's go take more. So our legacy, like you were mentioning, our eternal legacy can be greater. So then that's where you kind of get the bloodshed that comes with that solar quality, like the darker side of the solar quality, where we're not like building it up like Saturn or like supporting it like Jupiter. We are now out for blood. And that's the type of, you know, bloodlust or whatever that we are encountering, like that side of the sun.
Yeah, it's just really interesting, especially in this Decan. I think I'm seeing it a lot more in this Decan than even the past ones. Looking at the past rulers of the other two Decans are really clarifying for me how this final Decan is different than the other two. And so if you think back to the last Decan, there's a quote in 36 Secrets where she says, "Where Jupiter's wheel of fortune gives and multiplies, Mars's tower takes and divides." And that's what Mars does, right? It takes and divides. And I think that there are a few interesting depictions in the cards here of that. One of the things that I want to point out is the presence of like the lightning here, definitely calling on the idea of dividing. On the far left, we have the Mother Piece deck, which is a really interesting image that I think has a lot to say about the past Decans as well, because where previously we've had Mother Piece images of Shakti, we have now Kali here pictured, and there's an eclipse happening in the sky. And for those of you who aren't familiar as much with astrology, eclipses are often considered very ominous times of instability and shifting circumstances. And so, especially in ancient times, it was considered a really ominous omen to have an eclipse in the sky. So clearly, Kali sitting on top of a tower with the power of fire around her. Kali was a goddess of fire, but she also depicted both creation and destruction. Which is really important to think about here with the tower, because while the tower can often be unplanned, unexpected circumstances that are really catastrophic and maybe even crisis inducing, there is the possibility to clear the way for things to come in later on. And that's what's depicted for me in the middle card here, the atom bomb. So this is the science deck, and the definition of this includes an explanation that the scientists who invented the atom bomb, almost every single one without fail, left the field that they were in. Many of them dedicated their lives to humanities after they had invented the atom bomb. They realized the humbling cost of wisdom by inventing this super dramatic weapon they realized that this is not the direction humanity should go in. And so, you know, while these are catastrophic, dangerous, potentially violent things that are happening with the tower, there is an opportunity in that moment of crisis to have some clarity, which I think is the solar side of the Mars-Sun combination. Clarity through violence.
Yeah, that's a good segue, actually, clarity through violence, because when we're talking about Kali, she's known as the compassionate mother for those of us who, you know, worship her, because she actually comes in and completely cuts away all of this unreal, essentially. So it's challenging, like it cuts away at the ego, it like cuts the head off of ego, it cuts away at that like overthinking and that chaotic part, to where you do get that like silence. It's cutting away everything that's unreal, everything that's constructed by, you know, Saturn and Leo, or everything that's, you know, sort of imagined as the sun, Jupiter image. It comes in and it says, what are you without all of those things? Right? And it completely, and it sheds it fast. It's like the compassion of a mother who like cleans a wound or rips off the Band-Aid fast or something like this, right? And the other thing I wanted to say about the Mother Peace tarot with the eclipse is, when we're talking about the day planets, Saturn and Jupiter, we are talking about support of the sun from the day team. But when we're talking about Mars, again, it has this like more chaotic or corrupt potential. And the reason why eclipses were considered to be ominous or bad fortune is it was literally a shadow over the sun. And the, you know, obviously the sun's getting eaten by the, you know, serpent or something like this. But the idea of the shadow over the sun, to me, shows the shadow side of the sun. And so that's what we're really getting at here.
And I want to mention about this taking of consciousness, because that lightning that falls from the sky is just something that you give words to, that has been mounting for a while, that has been building for a while, as has been said. And that giving words to it allows you to move in a new direction, which is immediately required of you, because that taking of consciousness is abrupt for a reason. It's abrupt because the violence is present and you are witnessing Mars itself. And thus you have to run the other direction very fast if you don't want to, you know, be engulfed by it. But the way you do it is by going within, by really examining, going to the base, like you see the figures in the Rider-Waite depiction going down from the top of the tower. They built this structure, this thing that was stable for them and secure, but they were trapped within it. This is something that is said also in the Pythagorean decks descriptions. And when it's destroyed, when they fall from it, they go back to the base. Of course, it's implied that they die, but as is this symbolic, it's a death that is more to the effect of, yes, that old me died, but from the multiplicity within the circumstances that I am inserted in now and this new clarity, what can I do? I already know that I have these capabilities. If you're still a living person, you still have your bodily functions, ideally, presumably in most situations. You have all of those functions, and even if the rest of your intelligence to use, to apply it to something new, but you have to depend on what's circumstantial around you. You have to look at it and seek within yourself what identifies with you in that new environment, so you can work from it, so you can grow with it. And so the tower process is much like finishing up college. And it has been for those of you who are privileged enough to go through that experience. When you finish up college, you realize that, you know, the organization of the capitalistic society is not as was promised when you started in that institution. And you have to grasp that fact and make do with what you learn. Many times you go off of your field of study and you are not able to follow a passion, and you have to really grapple with that within yourself and how that changes your perspective of who you wanted to become when you started that journey that has changed you so much. And so it's just that. It's that moment where you don't see anymore the base that you once saw. and you need to reconstruct by going within and having that internal journey, which is going to be more clear in the next Decan, Virgo 1, spoiler alert. But right now, it's that moment of the taking of the consciousness, which is abrupt and scary. And you just get lost in the multiplicity if you don't have a strong sense of courage and self.
I like, especially in the first part of what you were saying, David, you could have definitely just been describing the qualities of Kali, right? Which is just like, even to the point of death, like you said, even if you don't die or you do die, it's like cutting everything down to its base. And that's it, right? You're cutting out all these constructions in this chaotic multiplicity so that you're cutting down to the base and having to sort of start new. And that does need to happen to leadership. That does need to happen to governance. And that does need to happen on the internal space of who we are. We have to be able to challenge our ideals and our egos and who we are, and almost at times put them through the fire or even put them to death in order to really come out forged. And when I think about this forging, I definitely think about, you know, I mean, I know the anvil is a different Decan or Decan again, because, you know, spoiler alert, Virgo. But when I think about like the forging of gold or something like this, or the forging of a sword, I think of this solar Martian archetype where you just have to heat it and pound it in order to come out the other side.
And it's interesting to compare with the Mars that we saw with the Nine of Swords. Was it the Nine of Swords? Yes, it was the Nine of Swords in the middle of Gemini, where we had the Lover's card with the Tower composing that. That would be more of an intellectual part of it. Like when you were with the Lovers and the Nine of Swords again, you are recalling ideas and all of that. Here, it's more of a primal instinct response. It is really, you're feeling defied, defied by the things that are, you know, around you, and you need to deconstruct yourself in order to preserve yourself. It's kind of contradictory in that way. And the other one, it was more intellectual. You just had to integrate the new idea that had come through, and you still kind of going through the trauma in a more psychological kind of way, where you have difficulty looking at things objectively. And here, it's not that you have any difficulty looking at it objectively. It's just, you know, drawing on your inspiration, on your spirit, to just react and to just be without any shame and unapologetically, and just allowing all of your multiplicity to shine through so you can usher that process of transformation.
Yeah, you know, it does. It's a good point, because when we have the Tower showing up in an air sign, it's almost like our mental anxiety and our fears that we could die and someone could cut us down and we could lose it all. But when you get Mars in a fire sign, Mars is already fiery. So it's already in a natural disposition in Leo, in this fire sign. So it's almost like the stuff, I don't want to say it like is a physical manifestation, because, you know, that might tend towards like an earth-centric elemental force, but you do really see fire at its prime nature. Like Mars really acts here, and action is Mars, right? Action is fire. And it's really, what do you want to say, a good home for Mars in that sense, where it's much more comfortable in a fire sign. It's able to like act and cut and do all of those things and do a real rebellion. It's not like doing it in its head where, oh my God, I could get cut down and there could be a rebellion and I could die and I could lose everything. Well, here it's like, heck yeah, you can. And it comes in and it sort of like does. It's
Mars and the Sun are both masculine planets, and the Tower is such a phallic symbol. I mean, all representations just about of the Tower. And so I just see this like combination as being very, just very poignant in that way.
Absolutely.
So we have the Pythagorean decks on the two cards from the Pythagorean deck that are the major arcana for this decan on the screen right now. So there's Fortitude, which we've seen a few times, and now the Tower. I really love the chakra centers here on the Tower. And I also find it very interesting, and I wonder if you have anything to say, either of you, about the kind of the light from deep underneath the tower blasting out of the top in a beautiful explosion, if that's kind of reminiscent of anything that you've seen or read before.
To me, it talks about two things. One is kind of like that science deck card that we talked about, with that kind of like combustible explosion, as well as when we have the chakras going up, and you see that sort of like pinnacle higher chakra at the very top, it makes me think about like the crown or the infinity symbol above the head. It's like those higher chakras. And when we're doing like kundalini, or again, it's like that Kali like energy coming from the base, or being cut down to the base, and like underneath in this space is the awakening. When you're talking about the chakras, you're talking about the Shakti, or Kali energy coming from the base of the spine, working its way up, Ida and Pingala, up the spine to blast open these like ethereal crown chakras. So to me, that's kind of what it is this internal deep base containment, which is martial, which is like that primal, like life force creation, even sexual energy that you're sort of rocking and moving up to explode out the top, right? That's the idea of awakening the kundalini, or awakening the chakras, is to like bring that base energy into that higher spiritual energy. And when we talked about like the crown on the strength card, how it maybe over time got moved into that affinity symbol, where it's like talking about the head, it's talking about the crown chakra, it's talking about us wanting to bring the energy up and move that crowned space into a divine space. And here we're saying that base quality of cutting it all down, stripping it all away, deconstructing it, and that higher intelligence, that divine transmission, how those are extremely connected. That's what I got. And we've got the elements pouring out too, where this is like an elemental alchemical like base movement. I also thought it was really interesting that this was an island, in this midst of the water. Like we've seen so many stories, like beings being born from this primordial sort of island.
And I wanted to also recall the idea of a lightning. You have to have two poles, to connect that energy. And basically, think about when you are in a relationship, a long-term relationship, and there's something that's always bothered you about the other person. There's one point after a million discussions where you suddenly realize, and you're like, oh, wait a minute. Now I see a pattern that I had never thought about before in this way, but that I have always reacted to in a bothersome manner. So I should pay more attention to that. It's like your base chakra, which is that more impulsive, reactive, unconscious part of you, is finally directing a lightning into itself from the crown chakra. It's like they made the people up there look at the base finally and be like, hey, we are going through something here, and this is the report after, so much time of neglect, or you not paying attention because you were too busy trying to, identify yourself and select stuff around you that were not really you, and that's kind of the lightning moment that changes everything around you. Once you see it, you cannot unsee it, like the eclipses. It's like someone turned the switch off and on again. So you visualize the scenario under a new light.
And the artist, I'm just glancing through a few highlights here. The artist of the Pythagorean tarot, or let's say the lore that is behind the art of this, one thing that they mention here is that the lightning is thought to confer an instantaneous shamanic initiation. The experience blasts open the gates of the underworld.
That's the gates of the underworld right down there. I love that.
I love that. And it makes me see also something that has to do with magical initiation, or in several cultures, religions, you have your initiative rituals. Even in Christianity, you have baptism. And those rituals, they are supposed to represent this moment where the person suddenly is aware of why they have been prepared for this in this manner. They become a member of their society fully because they technically theoretically understand what they are trying to embody. I say theoretically and technically because we don't know that not to be true in most cases.
Especially when they're like 6 or 7 when they...
Yes, but what I mean by this is just that when you are made aware, when you're an initiate of any kind in any culture, and you're made aware of things that are beyond your level of magic, it can be actually dangerous for you and your health, because you are already in contact, allowing a certain type of energy to flow through you. So if you try to attract more than you normally do in order to, I don't know, cast spells that are much beyond your level of, much beyond your level, you will attract that tower energy into your life. It's as if, oh, I want to do a prosperity ritual that involves, I don't know, sacrifice, which is a very heavy thing to do. And you've only been doing like Wiccan types of rituals from, you know, those little magazines that they sell in stands. Well, if you try to do that, you might have just open a portal for those energies to manifest through your life much earlier than it's due in your life, and that you have wisdom to handle. And so those energies can actually derail your life in a way that you're not prepared to. So I think the tower also represents that courage, but also the moment where we insist on something that is not for us, and it ends up destroying us in a way, but not because we have been harnessing it, but just because we have been dealing with it forcefully in a way that is not like the 7 of Wands and the Force together here.
Yeah, totally. And as any, you know, yogic practitioner will know, if you've ever tried to mess with, you know, Kundalini yoga, especially, like you'll always hear yoga teachers reminding you that trying to go too fast is dangerous, or, you know, you can't push into a yoga pose. It's a form of aggression or something like this, right? To try to go too fast and try to have an achievement-oriented mind within yoga, whether it's like Kundalini, which is the awakening the snake, or whether it's in like a physical asana posture, you are, you know, asked to take it slow. There's so many Kundalini, you know, warnings saying like, you're not ready to handle like the awakening and like all of these things. And yoga has just like, you just get these constant warnings of like these occult initiate barriers of like not going too fast, not pushing into it, not taking on more than you can handle magically in your body. One thing
even with astrology.
Yeah, absolutely, in everything, right? So it's like that pushing through. It's like there's this danger quality. One other
I remember
thing
I'm sorry.
Go ahead. No.
When I started my experience with astrology, just quickly, I really had an identity crisis, and you're not ready to really face what your chart says many times, because I remember that many of the questions that were risen in my head, for instance, when I looked at my 6th house and saw my chart ruler there with the benefic of sect in a malefic sign, I was like, oh shit, my life was that hard. And then I started reflecting on the trauma, and that opened a gate that I was not ready to face alone. And I went through hell because I had those realizations alone through a tool that was much more powerful than I realized when I started messing with it. So yeah, rude awakenings.
I love that. But damn, David, damn. I love that. That is like literally the exact same experience that I've had with astrology. And it's why at the beginning of studying astrology, a lot of us are very preoccupied with our charts and like very almost, it comes off as self-centered and selfish, because what we actually want here is some self-recognition and some acknowledgement externally of the things that we felt inside, or the ability to dig down with a shovel and like dig all that shit out, you know, clear it out. Sorry.
Yeah, I think that's why a lot of people come to astrology and to tarot specifically for that mirror, for that validation. And sometimes it's very easy, like when you consult the oracle, it would come in that genuine way of like really wanting to know. And then the universe says, oh, you can know. And here it all is. And then you're like, whoa, and that's the same with like any self, yoga is the same way. So that's why we had these teachers sort of bringing that to our mind, is like, it's very easy when we approach the universe itself to be awed and overwhelmed by its magnitude and by its potential.
And it throws off your concept of identity. It completely throws off your concept of identity, which is so Mars and the sun.
A Christian myth that we have is Saul in the desert becoming Paul, because he saw Jesus appearing after the resurrection and ascension, appearing in front of him as a beam of light that blinded him. He became aware instantly, like this tower moment, and he fell off his horse because he understood what he was persecuting. And it was himself. It was more of an idea of himself. And he tried to identify with that, became who he became, spreading Catholicism through Europe. It was his fault. If you guys want someone to blame.
The other thing that I wanted to mention here that comes from the Pythagorean companion book is this story, when we're looking at the tower card, of the central flame at the top of the chakra system here, the higher chakra that I was mentioning. We see a double-edged bolt and 4 flames surrounding the central flame. It's essentially identical to the Tibetan Dorje or the Hindu Vajra. And the story that we have with it is this inseminating bolt that survives the golden lance of Sir Lancelot. And then he gives the etymology for Lancelot. And then whom Sir Lancelot is born from the Lady of the Lake, arising from the abyss.
This is the Vajra, or what did you call it?
Vajra, or the Dorje if it's Tibetan. Exactly. And that's the shape that we see on top with the crown chakra. And it also talks about the cap on this thing being the crescent moon. I mean, there's 7 pages or something talking about the imagery in this card, but I just loved that Dorje moment, and the fact that that's connected to Lancelot and the Lady of the Lake, which is also this same primordial ocean that the eclipses rise from and Vishnu rises from. So you see this again, this island imagery arising from the abyss.
And as if we needed the sword laying down on the strength, the fortitude card is just this another addendum to how rationality doesn't apply here. You have to be instinctual because of circumstance. It's forced to be that way.
So the other thing that I wanted to mention here, and this goes back to that, of course, I'm sorry, but it's always going to come back to that Shiva Shakti principle. But because you mentioned this phallic nature of the tower, I wanted to read this paragraph from the Pythagorean tarot. The tower is built on the mound of the Great Mother, which represents her by her means of its mass, its height, the earth in which it's made, and the cave by which the mound is centered. A hero earns his manhood by mounting it and erecting the tower on its summit, for the tower is both masculine and feminine. And that's what we see with the ocean and the island of the phallus. That's also what we see in that Holy Grail, or the Lingam Yoni dynamic, which is they're together. It's like one unit. The Linga Yoni, the encasement that you see it in is always the Yoni with the Linga together. And you see that here in this island creation. I thought that mounting of the Great Mother in order to do this rite of passage as this manhood, this both masculine and feminine archetype, I really saw in this particular depiction of the tower. Do we want to move on? Do we want to move on to the Seven of Wands?
Yes, for sure. So the Seven of Wands is the Lord of Valor. I really enjoy the variety of depictions of the Seven of Wands shown here on the screen. We have the traditional Rider-Waite-Smith version on the far left. In the middle, we have the cat version, the cat tarot deck version, which I liked because I think it is reminiscent of the tower, knocking down the cat toys off the shelf which is very cat-like behavior. And then on the far right, we have the Scapini deck. And I find this a really interesting image that's worth meditating on. And I love both of your feedback on what you see here. But I do see a group of people who seem to be interested in sport and in fun and in kind of a lords and ladies nobility type day, who are being yelled at by a fiery Martian figure, red hair, red clothes, super angry, over a series of 7 wands. So I find that really interesting. A little bit of Mars, a little bit of that Leonine. Potentially this could be for fun or sport, but there's something else going on here that's a little bit more serious, a little more aggressive, a little more Martian.
Yeah, just that the martial figure is like on top here. And when I think 7, I always think 7 planets. And when I was looking at this card, I was like, you know, we definitely see Saturn here, right? With the tattered blackness kind of like behind the other figure, like partially obscured. So I was wondering, like, are these depictions of the 7 planets? We could see potentially a mercurial figure, a Venusian figure, a lunar figure. So it just sort of, you know, it got my mind working in that direction, but that is not explicitly stated in the deck.
It's just a very interesting representation, unlike any that I've seen in any other decks. So it's worth meditating on, I think.
I like the stream of water flowing down from his left foot. You're talking about the base on instinct again, because these rivers that flow in the Rider-Waite deck, they come from that moon card, the High Priestess, which is that river that flows from her feet and the moon. So it's the primal waters, the thing that we were talking about again in that other card of the Tower being evoked.
Absolutely. The feminine quality, like under his left foot, left is also, you know, the left-handed path has everything to do with the night and the feminine qualities too. So it's no surprise that it's under that left foot, which is giving, what does it give us there? Does it give us some sort of like support? Does it give us some
it means that the base for his
growth?
actions, where he's treading, has to do with the instinctual beliefs, what he knows from experience, right? What he knows from the multiplicity of who they are, basically.
Yeah, and it just reminds me of the idea of growth, right? Where we have to deconstruct ourselves in order to grow in like a genuine way, and there's a nutritive quality to that.
I love it. And so the last slide here that I wanted to show is the progression of from the Mother Peace deck of the 5, 6, 7 of wands. And what's really interesting about this, going back to what we talked about earlier, how the 5s and the 7s are both off balance, seeking the equilibrium of the 6. So the story being told here, as was referenced in Leo 1, is that there was a sort of friendly battle, a competition to see who was going to be the High Priestess. They all had been, you know, studying together. They were peers. And so it's not like they're going to fight to the death, but they are in a competition, right? And then in the middle, the 6, we have the winner. We have the person who is going to be the next High Priestess. She's wielding all of the power. She's actualized herself in her victory. And then in the 7, where we are now, we have that same figure here, although now she has to deal with competing interests among her group of other priestesses. There's a woman standing up in defiance in front of her, probably a form of rebellion. There are lots of people voicing different positions or literally in different positions around her that she has to acclimate to. And she herself is in a sense in a defensive position with her torch and the crescent moon crown on top of her head. So,
yeah, trying to maintain that power of like, wait, like, no, like, let's, you know, the idea of multiplicity and challenge is like for any leader, we know, or any person, like if you've ever maintained any kind of position, let's say of power or any kind of like leadership, you know that instantly there's demands, and the demands are many and they're very contradictory. So they force us to like make this choice, it's like almost impossible to please everyone kind of a situation, you know? And at that point you have to, again, challenge who you are. Where am I going to make the cuts, and with whom am I going to, you know, displease, essentially? Like, which group is going to come after me depending on whatever decision that I make.
Yes. Yes. So I just think this deck really depicts that perfectly, that progression, that hero's journey. It's not a hero in this case, it's a priestess, and it's in the minor arcana, it's the pips, but it's a very poignant journey that she's going on that really talks about this 5, 6, 7 suit.
Yeah, and I also really see, like, here we see almost like an infighting, right? Like the rebellion, right? Like it's the qualms of what happens within the structure itself. But you could also imagine that they could be squabbling about what to do about a war, about a without threat. Because I'm thinking about Austin's like within and without. What if they're saying, hey, the tribe next door is whatever, and they're saying we should do this, let's fight, and the other ones are saying like it's fine, let's like solve it in a different way. So the idea of like, should we go to war or not, is definitely a conundrum of a leader. And you're never going to have like all the people wanting war or all the people wanting peace. You know, so there's always going to be the ones that think that it's a just cause for fight, and the people not wanting to risk the internal structure in order to go to war. So I see that as a potential argument here as well.
Absolutely. All right, well, those were all the cards I wanted to throw up today. I can stop sharing my screen if there's any others that you all wanted to share, or...
Well, I think we're good to go to the Picatrix depiction, which I'm not going to spend too much time in. It's kind of contradictory, in my opinion, in a sense that you have one depiction of a man in a scenery, and then it's a face of love, delight, but you guys will see. It goes, there rises in the third face of Leo a man who is old and black and ugly, with fruit and meat in his mouth, and holding a copper jug in his hand. This is a face of love and delight, and food and trace and health. I mean, I can see the longevity, the man being old. I can see the face of delight and food trays with the man being, eating fruit and having those things. I just don't get the copper jug, and I don't get why he has to be ugly and black. I mean, why is that depiction important in this scenery specifically? I really don't get why. If you guys could enlighten me, or if anyone knows and can leave it in the comments.
Yeah, I mean, in my mind, it's the blackness is just about, again, that kind of like primordial space, or even the malefic space. So we've also got depictions of this character being red. So I think it depends on the tradition. But we have the eating of meat and the eating of fruit, which is like Austin talks about the masticizing. What do you call it when you're chewing? Like how chewing, masticating, how chewing is like the most violent thing that we do on like a daily basis. Like we cut our food, or if you think about the juices that explode from a fruit, it's like, it could be sensual, but it could also be kind of like disgusting if you think about someone just like, kind of like greedily like eating cherries or like meat or pomegranates or something like this. So it's got this idea again of lust to me, which is that martial quality. And I know in magic we use copper for Venus, but copper is also associated with Mars, depending on the tradition. And it's because it's a reddish metal, and it's like less primary than like gold or silver, which are assigned to the sun and moon. So a lot of times copper is associated with Mars as well, which we all know that Venus and Mars are on that kind of polarity anyway. So it could be confusing if you're using copper only for Venus, but that's what I got, is this like red sort of, I guess, cheaper for the common folk in a sense, metal, where I don't know if I keep all of my water in copper, but it also has this taste that can develop over time. And I just feel like all of that, when you think about like iron and blood, like not iron, the metal, but like maybe the taste of iron that you get when you're like tasting copper or tasting meat or your own blood or something like this. And just the idea of lustfully, grinding the food or the kill or the hunt or something like this.
Susan Chang does address it in her book about, what these characters might mean. And she references it as being basically the things that are worth fighting for, that it would be what the warrior wanted to protect was that figure's ability to have the food and the meat in their hands, or the other figure who I think, is it from Agrippa, with love and society and the lowering of oneself for avoiding battle. It's like the fighting to avoid battle is somehow depicted in this Decan.
It's like the idea of like just eating and effing or whatever is like definitely like a debased version of Mars as well as Venus, but just kind of this idea of like violence to the self, violence around you, just to, gain lust. And when I'm thinking about, also we see like the Saturnine qualities essentially when we see like old, black, ugly, like all of those things. I think that also has to do with this being the last Decan, and how towards an end of a sign we see like a degeneration and a dying off of the Decan. Again, just those malefic like qualities.
And I know that Saturn rules this Decan by the triplicity scheme. Yes. So maybe, I'm not sure if in the ancient times of the Picatrix they would have that scheme already in place for the Decans, but
absolutely not everyone's using. Yes, not everyone's using the descending order, and we get a lot of that. So you're going to see a lot of the different rulership, especially because we're looking at the Picatrix. It's multi-layered, it's multi-authored. So it could be coming from the Abhinajataka, the Indian tradition, the Persian tradition. So you're going to have like the descending order stuff, which is what we use with like the Golden Dawn. But you're definitely going to see like the triplicity rulers and carry-ons and carry-overs of the rulers. So I think what you're seeing there is a Saturnine depiction. Austin talks about like a crocodile smile too, like this like kind of like Martian, like you can almost imagine like someone with like ruddy skin or like crooked teeth, just like devouring meat and looking at you with like a mischievous, like chaotic smile or something like that. But yeah, I think the Saturnine quality of the end of the sign, and again, with the Picatrix, we're looking at like a multiplicity of rulership. It's not like a stuck thing. We're getting a lot of mixes from different cultures in the Picatrix.
And so, can we go for our nativities? We have Madonna starting the race, because we were mentioning the fall of the king, and I was like thinking, yeah, Madonna's kind of flopped nowadays. And I think, the gay community retired her already, I would say.
Yeah, and you do see her as a quite martial figure. Like back in the day, in the rise or the height of her success, she was just considered like almost like a too sexual or like hypersexual as a woman, right? It was like a woman in a man's world kind of thing that was put upon her, and her image and her sexuality, where it wasn't like this. It was dark in a certain sense, but it was more like an in-your-face version of like a Martian quality, like, and it was chaotic to the scene at the time, right? It was just like unapologetically sexual and material,
Yes. Who else do we got?
We have Bill Clinton. We have a few other famous folks like Halle Berry, Jennifer Lawrence, Robert De Niro.
Jennifer Lawrence. Yeah. Sorry.
I was going to say, I find all of them do have some warrior or tough guy vibes of some sort. So that's interesting.
Jennifer Lawrence, I feel like she shines the brightest in those roles like Katniss, where she has intense, deep, emotional like catharsis, which is that kind of vibe that we get in this Decan. Like you see the Hunger Games series, how she is the depiction as Katniss of the Seven of Wands, like throughout the series and of the Tower and everything else. I mean, literally.
It's absolutely wanting the chaos, right? It's like, bring the chaos on. We need to collapse this structure once she finds out like what's going on. And she has, again, that lion heart, that iron heart, that brave heart. She's the hero that we want, you know, to prevail over her enemies. And I think that that's like the best qualities that come with this Decan, which is like fighting against the power for what's right. And you like, her heart is why we love her. Like, she's always like helping those who are in need. She's always, you know, helping her little sister and like doing the right thing in this fierce way, like standing up to the powers in like this very like abundant hearted, like fierce like manner.
And I think that Hunger Games, the second movie, especially Catching Fire, is a very good depiction of the Seven of Wands, whereas the first one could be a Five of Wands kind of scenario. She is called to the Hunger Games. That's the structure that is in place. She's obliged to it. She's already started it by being like, no, I volunteer. I am displaying this courage of being there for my sister, and I want just to resolve this issue. But then when she's out of the experience, she's dragged into it again. And she's like, it doesn't matter what I do, because it's not about participating and winning the games. It's about maintaining a structure in place that uses fear. And so she starts, you know, she's radicalized at that point. She had been radicalized before, but now she sees that she has no way out. She has to either fight or be consumed by this structure. Yes. And she's forced to, even by the people who are, you know, using her as a flag. Like, she's used. And
even just like the Hunger Games, right? It has to do with like hunger. And we see this like fierceness to fight. And again, that courageous heart that we all wish that we were, right? We want that in our heroes. We want them to be coming from this soft place, but like stand in defiance for that place and, you know, stand up for what we believe in and our ideals and the might of right and all of this. Like, that's what we're getting here with this.
And the Tower moment when the Capitol's dome just starts falling down, the whole set of the game starts falling down. This is the ultimate depiction of the Tower. When she shoots that arrow with a literal lightning, to dismantle the whole system, the whole thing. And from that point on, the revolution was declared. She had no way of holding it back. She was the image, whether she wanted it or not. And she was actually sequestered by the people who were on her side, technically. But she had no sides. She was just caught up in the middle as an individual of this fight that was never hers. And the things that she were fighting for were actually taken from her throughout the series. And she became nothing of what she was trying to protect before. Everything fell apart, everything died, everything went away. But she still managed to reconstruct herself because she just maintained that sense of self and that sense of, I am not going to let them win, whatever it takes. And at this point, we're not talking about Jennifer Lawrence, obviously. We're talking about, this could manifest in her life in other ways, but we're talking about this archetype that she embodies so well and that launched her into stardom and makes her noticeable in society. She embodies that character. And you also have her having scandals around her career, because she had intimate photos of her being displayed online, and she, illegally of course, and she responded to it in such a mature way. She like defended herself. She showed that she was not in the wrong for having a sexuality and expressing it to other people in her privacy. She was not the wrong one for having her privacy invaded, and she broke those taboos in a way. And so sexual scandal, especially, when it's very public in that way, betrayal, it has to do with Mars as well. And maintaining one's sense of self, even with all the pushback when that kind of thing happens, especially if you're a woman in this society, in the limelight, was very brave of her, very courageous. And she did it in an exemplary way.
Absolutely. And I think she does exemplify that, what we want to be, again, like the heart of a hero, like the heart of a son. When someone betrays us, we still are a class act or whatever, like betrayed in the most intimate or sexual way is definitely a Martian thing. Martian qualities can have to do with like non-consensual activities and betrayals. So and like forced situations. And when we're put under those kind of fires, like the hero comes up this shining one anyways, you know? And so I really like that.
Ended up having a bit more to say on her than I thought.
I was gonna say I feel bad. I've never seen those movies. So
well, they're worth it. And you're talking to someone who doesn't watch a whole lot.
I know. I was like, damn.
Elsa's really talking even about a movie. Like wow, that was good. I didn't know that Katniss would have so much to give us today. Thanks, Jennifer Lawrence. I think that brings us, I think we've made the point. I think we've, talked about that general arc that we're trying to convey. So with that, I think we'll close up with the Leo Decans and Leo 3. It's been a pleasure, Leos. And we will, let's first, before I say see you at Virgo, I think we'll talk a little bit about what we're doing, and then KD will ring us out with our poem from T. Susan Chang. So David, you are the First Place Astrology.
Yes, in the First Place Astrology.com. You can find me in the First Place Astrology on Instagram, on Twitter. I am at First Place Astro. You can find the links below. And also, don't forget to check out Elsa's Patreon, because we are doing the study buddy sessions for Demetra George's Ancient Astrology Volume 2 book that just came out. So we are doing these study buddy sessions, these study sessions in groups, so you guys can deepen your understanding of the practice in community, because that really speeds up the process of learning this. And also, sharing is a way of not getting overwhelmed in the way that we talked about earlier in the video. Don't forget to like and subscribe. That helps the algorithm really love us better and share this content for those who want to learn more from it. So really engage with us in our materials if you can. And in the First Place Astrology, I offer tutorings, all the good stuff that you get from astrology consultations. Generally, you can check out my website.
Thank you, David. And I appreciate you mentioning the Patreon. It is a way of like externalizing our thoughts as we go. It's a really awesome way to learn. And so we will be doing that all this year and next. So please do come join us. That would be really fun to have you. And KD is at kddayton.com, also offering tutoring and readings as far as tarot.
Yeah, tarot and astrology readings.
And astrology readings as well. And myself, like, please feel free to book with me. Feel free to reach out. You can definitely feel free to hit me up. I also do tutoring for readings. We will see you at Virgo. And KD, you want to bring us out with the poem?
Sure. Okay, so this is called Noon of the Sunbather by Marge Piercy. The sun struts over the asphalt world, arching his gaudy plumes till the streets smoke and the city sweats oil under his metal feet. A woman nude on a rooftop lifts her arms. Men have swarmed like ants over my thighs, held their Sunday picnics of gripe and crumb, the twitch and nip of all their gristled traffic. When will my brain pitch like a burning tower? Lion, come down, explode the city of my bones. The god stands on the steel blue arch and listens. He strides the hills of igniting air. Straight to the roof he hastens, wings outspread. In his first breath, she blackens and curls like paper. The limp winds of noon disperse her ashes. But the ashes dance. Each ash fleck leaps at the sun.
Matao kako bersama you demikian soba da soba kena matahi bang kau di mana demikian soba and soba atai banake ujuna bahikana kamaya da ongai esa Your Majesty, Matai. in the kina to the bine to you guys in by it with the bike